Linus Pauling won 2 Nobel Prizes, one for chemistry, one for peace. He was one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century, and in the last decades of his life, he became convinced that massive doses of vitamin C could cure cancer. It couldn't. He died still believing it. The disturbing part isn't that a genius was wrong. It's that his intelligence made him more convincing, more confident, and more resistant to the evidence that he was mistaken. There is a program running in every mind that uses intelligence as a weapon against reality. It doesn't help you find truth. It helps you win arguments, defend beliefs, and construct increasingly sophisticated justifications for whatever you already think. The smarter you are, the better this program runs. Evolutionary psychologists call this motivated reasoning, and it exists because our ancestors, who could argue persuasively, regardless of whether they were objectively correct, survived better in tribal hierarchies. Intelligence evolved for social persuasion, not objective truth. Here is exactly how this program runs. Keith Stanovich spent decades studying the relationship between intelligence and rationality, and in 2009, he published findings that should have changed how we think about being smart. He discovered that IQ tests measure only a narrow set of cognitive abilities: processing speed, working memory, pattern recognition, and completely miss what he called rational thinking dispositions. The correlation between IQ scores and real-world judgment quality is roughly 0.2 to 0.3, barely above noise. Stanovich named this disconnect Dysrationalia, the inability to think rationally despite adequate intelligence. In 2008, West, Toplak, and Stanovich tested thousands of people on cognitive biases like my-side bias, outcome bias, and the sunk cost fallacy. Higher intelligence showed zero correlation with bias resistance. On several tasks, it showed negative correlation. Smarter people were more likely to fall for the bias, particularly when it aligned with beliefs they already held. The mechanism has 3 parts. First, intelligent people have superior working memory and processing speed, which means they can generate justifications faster and more elaborately than others. When confronted with contradictory evidence, they don't reconsider. They construct counter-arguments. Second, my-side bias affects everyone equally, but smarter people produce more numerous and sophisticated arguments for their own position. Stanovich's data shows that a high IQ individual evaluating evidence doesn't weigh both sides fairly. They build a more compelling case for the side they already chose. Third, intelligence creates confidence. If you have been told your entire life that you are smart, and you have received consistent reinforcement in academic and professional settings, you learn to trust your intuitions. This prevents the self-doubt that might trigger more careful reasoning. The same tools that make someone successful in technical domains become instruments of self-deception when identity or prior belief is involved. Dan Kahan at Yale ran an experiment in 2013 that made this visceral. He gave people data about a new skin cream, identical risk statistics presented as numbers. Then he gave another group the same data, but described it as evidence about gun control policy. The people evaluating skin cream data interpreted it correctly. The people evaluating gun control data did not. More numerate individuals, those with higher mathematical reasoning ability, did not converge on the correct interpretation. They polarized. The better someone was at math, the more likely they were to interpret the data in a way that aligned with their political identity, even when that interpretation was objectively wrong. This happens in medicine constantly. Physicians with decades of experience ignore base rates when diagnosing patients. A doctor who recently treated 3 rare diseases becomes more likely to diagnose the 4th patient with another rare condition, despite the statistical improbability. Availability bias overrides their training. Experience doesn't correct it, it entrenches it, because each misdiagnosis that happens to be correct by chance reinforces their confidence in the faulty heuristic. Kary Mullis won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for inventing PCR, one of the most important techniques in molecular biology. He spent years publicly denying that HIV causes AIDS, dismissing the overwhelming scientific consensus with arguments that sounded sophisticated because he was capable of sophisticated reasoning. His intelligence didn't protect him from irrationality. It made him a more effective advocate for a false belief. Stanovich documented the life consequences of Dysrationalia across multiple studies. People with high IQs but poor rational thinking skills make worse financial decisions. They fall for sunk cost fallacies in investments, pouring money into failing projects because they have already committed resources. They experience more relationship dysfunction because my-side bias prevents them from genuinely considering their partner's perspective. They don't lack empathy. They lack the cognitive humility to recognize when their narrative is incomplete. In organizations, intelligent leaders with Dysrationalia create entire cultures of confirmation bias. Dissent isn't ignored, it's intellectually dismantled. The smarter the leader, the more sophisticated the dismantling, and the less likely anyone in the room is to notice that the evidence was never actually addressed. A 2015 study by Fernbach found that people with higher self-assessed knowledge of complex policies held more extreme political views, but could not explain how those policies actually worked. Perceived expertise, often correlated with intelligence, increases confidence without improving judgment. Medical errors, financial bubbles, and technological disasters regularly involve rooms full of brilliant people making systematically terrible decisions, because no one recognized that intelligence doesn't immunize against bias. It conceals bias behind sophisticated-sounding rationales that everyone mistakes for rigorous thinking. The research on debiasing is not encouraging. Stanovich's later work found that teaching critical thinking in isolation produces minimal transfer to real-world decisions. Knowing about biases doesn't stop you from running them. However, specific strategies show modest effects. Training people to actively consider the opposite position reduces my-side bias by 30 to 40% in experimental settings, though the effect decays over weeks without reinforcement. Teaching probabilistic reasoning improves performance on some judgment tasks, but doesn't generalize broadly. The most promising approach is what Stanovich calls mindware, explicitly learning decision frameworks like expected value calculations or Bayesian reasoning, then practicing them repeatedly across different contexts until they become automatic. But even this has limits. Researchers who study cognitive bias professionally still fall victim to the same biases in their personal lives. Awareness provides some protection, but it is not immunity. The program still runs. Once you can see the script, you can choose whether to keep running it. But choosing requires recognizing that intelligence is not the same as rationality, and that being smart often means being better at defending the beliefs you already have, rather than finding the ones that are actually true. Next time, we will decode why people stay in situations that are clearly destroying them, and why trying to leave often makes it worse. I'll see you in the next file.